Southwest of Tenerife, in the Canary Islands, the seafloor drops away to between 800 and 2,000 meters. Short-finned pilot whales have lived here year-round for as long as researchers have been looking, and biologist Natacha Aguilar de Soto spent years trying to understand exactly what they do when they leave the surface. In 2008, she and her colleagues published what became the defining study on the subject. They attached digital acoustic recording tags, DTAGs, to 23 short-finned pilot whales in waters between 800 and 2,000 meters deep, 1 to 8 kilometers off the southwest coast. The tags logged depth, orientation, and sound at a continuous rate. What they found forced a revision of how anyone had thought about this animal. During daytime foraging dives, those whales were descending to depths between 538 and 1,019 meters. Median depth was 762 meters. At the bottom of some dives, they were sprinting at nearly 9 meters per second, fast enough that the researchers titled the paper, "Cheetahs of the Deep Sea." Maximum recorded dive duration was 21 minutes. That is the behavior the title of this script is built around. An air-breathing mammal dropping a kilometer into the ocean, accelerating hard in the dark, and then returning to breathe. So the question is a fair one. Does that sequence carry a literal drowning risk? 3 things need to be established before that question can be answered honestly. First, which squid are these animals actually hunting? Second, what does chasing that prey demand physiologically? And third, does the documented evidence support the word drowning, or is it compressing something real into language that doesn't quite fit? Start with the prey. Pilot whales are almost exclusively squid eaters. The technical term is teutophagus, and it applies across both species, the short-finned Globicephala macrorhynchus and the long-finned Globicephala mellas, and across most of their range. But the specific squid vary considerably by ocean basin and population, and that variation matters because the squid's location determines the depth the whale must reach. For the Canary Islands population specifically, the most detailed recent stomach content study came in 2024 from Amanda Luna and colleagues at the University of Vigo. A short-finned pilot whale calf's stomach contents were analyzed. 15 species of oegopsid squid were identified, mostly diel vertical migrants from the families Histioteuthidae, Enoploteuthidae, Omostrephidae, Chiroteuthidae, Cranchidae, Lepidoteuthidae, and Bathyteuthidae. That's roughly a quarter of the known cephalopod diversity of the Canary Islands in a single stomach sample, and every identified species was a mesopelagic migrator. Earlier work from the same population, a 1994 analysis by Hernandez Garcia and Martin of 2-stranded short-finned pilot whales, found stomachs composed entirely of cephalopods, families Cranchidae, Histioteuthidae, and Chiroteuthidae, with Taunius species prominent. A 2008 North Carolina mass stranding of the same species yielded stomach contents dominated by Brachiotuthis risae at 28%, Taunius parvo at 12%, and Histiotuthis reversa at 9%, alongside the deep-water fish Scopologodus bianii. In Hawaiian waters, histiotuthid squid have been identified as primary prey from a 2019 biologing study by Owen and colleagues. For long-finned pilot whales in Scotland, Omostrephidae dominate. In Iberia, Octopodidae are numerically more important. In the Faroe Islands, Todorodes sagittatus and Gonatus species feature heavily. No peer-reviewed stomach content study from any population of either pilot whale species has reported Humboldt squid, Dosidicus gigas, as documented dietary remains. Stable isotope work in the Gulf of California suggests those eastern Pacific pilot whales feed at a trophic level consistent with jumbo squid, but that is isotopic inference, not direct dietary evidence. The title's implied connection to Humboldt squid reflects audience interest. The biology is more varied. What all these prey species share is their depth distribution. Histiotuthis duflini, one of the Pacific histioteuthids recorded in pilot whale diets in Hawaii, occupies 500 to 700 meters during the day. as documented by Richard Young's vertical distribution surveys off Oahu. Histioteuthis bonnellii, found in the 2024 Canary Islands calf study, has a known range of 150 to 4,000 meters, with trawl catches concentrated at 400 to 600 meters. Histioteuthis reversa, common in North Atlantic pilot whale diets from the Bay of Biscay to North Carolina, is caught primarily at 540 to 645 meters in trawl surveys. Taunius and Cranchiidae species, which appear repeatedly across both pilot whale species, are mesopelagic residents in broadly similar depth ranges. Adult Gonatus fabricii, a dominant prey item for other deep-diving cetaceans like the northern bottlenose whale in the same waters, are concentrated between 400 and 600 meters in North Atlantic surveys, with adults generally distributed from 400 to 1,100 meters. The picture is consistent. Whatever squid a pilot whale in the Canary Islands, the North Atlantic, or Hawaii is hunting at midday, it lives between roughly 400 and 1,000 meters. Nighttime diel migration brings some of these animals upward by a few hundred meters, but histioteuthed squid are classified as partial or non-migrants in some studies. They shift, but they don't become shallow. Long-finned pilot whales in the Ligurian Sea time their deepest foraging dives within 2 hours after sunset, according to Baird et al.'s 1999 Mediterranean tagging work, and those dives still reached 648 meters. Night helps, but it doesn't eliminate the descent requirement. So the whale must go down. The question is how far, how fast, and what it costs. The Aguilar de Soto 2008 study remains the sharpest published dive profile for short-finned pilot whales. Daytime foraging dives in the Canary Islands had a median maximum depth of 762 meters and a median duration of 15 minutes, with a range of 11 to 21 minutes. The recorded maximum was 1,018 meters. Sprint speeds at depth reached approximately 9 meters per second, roughly 20 miles per hour, which the researchers interpreted as high-speed pursuit of fast-moving mobile prey. A later multi-site study using 43 tag deployments recorded a maximum depth of 1,077 meters and a maximum duration of 23 minutes. In Hawaii, Robin Baird's team deployed 10 time depth recorders and 6 Criticam units on short-finned pilot whales between 2002 and 2003, collecting 101 hours of depth data. Deepest dives typically reached 600 to 800 meters, with a maximum recorded duration of 27 minutes. Off Madeira Island, 6 time depth recorders on resident and transient adults recorded a maximum depth of 988 meters. Long-finned pilot whales dive somewhat shallower by the biologging record. Heide Jurgensen and colleagues, using satellite-linked recorders on 3 individuals in the Faroe Islands, recorded a maximum depth of 828 meters and a mean daily maximum of approximately 600 meters. More than 60% of their dives lasted under 3 minutes, though the mean for deeper dives was around 8 minutes. Baird's Ligurian Sea work found a maximum of 648 meters in a single subadult male. Secondary sources claim long-finned pilot whales exceed 1,000 meters, but the primary biologging record for this species peaks at 828 meters. Claims above that aren't yet confirmed by published tag data. One more number is necessary for scale. Wells and colleagues in 2013 analyzed 13,329 dive records from 2 short-finned pilot whales released after a Florida Keys mass stranding. 88% of those dives were shallower than 50 meters. Only 1.6% exceeded 500 meters. The deep, hour-consuming foraging dives that the Cheetahs paper described are real and documented, but they are a small fraction of what pilot whales do with their time. The other 98.4% of dives are shallow passes, social dives, and surface resting. Recovery, mostly, which is relevant to what comes next. To understand why pilot whales can reach these depths without immediately facing a terminal oxygen crisis, the physiology needs to be walked through honestly. The aerobic dive limit, ADL, is defined not as the point when oxygen runs out, but as the dive duration beyond which post-dive blood lactate concentration begins to rise above resting levels. Koeman and Ponganis established this definition through work on Weddell seals, published in the Annual Review of Physiology in 1998. Critically, it's a threshold for the onset of anaerobic metabolism in some tissues, primarily locomotor muscle. It does not mean the animal has run out of air. Weddell seals have been documented diving 2 to 3 times longer than their measured ADL, with oxygen still present in some stores. A diving cetacean carries oxygen in 3 compartments: lungs, blood, and muscle. In deep diving odontocetes, including short-finned pilot whales, the proportion held in each compartment shifts significantly from what one might expect. Koeman and Ponganis documented that in deep divers, 80 to 90% of total body oxygen is concentrated in blood and muscle. Myoglobin concentrations in cetacean locomotor muscle run between 1.81 and 5.78 grams per 100 grams of wet tissue, markedly above terrestrial mammals. Noren and Williams in 2000 found that body mass and myoglobin content together explain 83% of variation in maximum dive duration across odontocetes. Brandy Velton's 2013 thesis work on short-finned pilot whale muscle found high myoglobin concentrations, predominantly large, slow-twitch fibers, and relatively low mitochondrial volume densities. A muscle architecture built for sustained aerobic output at moderate power rather than explosive sprinting near the surface. The locomotor muscle oxygen store is the single largest fraction of total body oxygen in these animals, with blood second and lungs a distant third. The lungs collapse at depth, typically somewhere between 30 and 70 meters, which means alveolar gas exchange stops early in the descent. Below that depth, the dive runs entirely on blood and muscle oxygen. This isn't a vulnerability. It also prevents nitrogen from absorbing into tissues under pressure, which is why nitrogen narcosis and classical decompression sickness aren't the primary concern for natural, undisturbed foraging dives. During the dive, heart rate slows dramatically, in some cetaceans to as low as 10% of surface rates, and peripheral blood flow is restricted, directing oxygen toward the brain and heart. Locomotor muscle, increasingly isolated from circulation, burns through its myoglobin-bound oxygen supply. As that store depletes, and if the dive continues long enough, some muscle tissue transitions to anaerobic glycolysis, producing lactate. That lactate stays in the muscle during the dive and washes out into the bloodstream afterward, driving the elevated breathing rate that Farman and colleagues measured in long-finned pilot whales, approximately 1.7 extra breaths per minute of dive time for dives deeper than 31 meters, with a maximum estimated cost for a single deep dive of roughly 27.5 breaths. The whale surfaces, breathes hard, and recovers. It does not black out. The actual ADL estimate for short-finned pilot whales was published in 2024. Ashley Blowers and colleagues at Duke University's Marine Laboratory analyzed 30,169 dives from 45 animals tagged with satellite-linked recorders off Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, and Jacksonville, Florida. The result was a species-level behavioral ADL of 18.8 minutes, with individual estimates ranging from 13.9 to 22.1 minutes. This is the 95th percentile of dive duration, the threshold below which 95% of observed dives fall. Earlier calculated estimates had spanned a wide range. Aguilar de Soto's 2005 PhD thesis calculated roughly 25 minutes based on oxygen store estimates. Velton's 2013 thesis, using higher assumed metabolic rates, arrived at approximately 14.2 minutes. Now compare those numbers to the measured dives. The median deep foraging dive in the Canary Islands, 15 minutes, falls below the 18.8-minute behavioral ADL. Most deep foraging dives, running 11 to 21 minutes, cluster around or just under that threshold, but the 21-minute maximum from the Canary Islands reaches it. The 27-minute dives recorded in Hawaii by Baird's team clearly exceeded, and the Mariana Archipelago study recorded deep dives averaging about 17 minutes, with some approaching 29 minutes. Those longer dives almost certainly push into anaerobic territory. Lactate accumulates in muscle, recovery breathing increases, and the animal needs more surface time before the next deep bout. The Blauers et al. Paper makes the distribution clear. Individual dives may exceed the ADL. We expect that most dives should be shorter than this physiological threshold. A behavioral ecology analysis of Western Atlantic short-finned pilot whales concluded these animals rarely, if ever, exceed their aerobic limits, on the basis of dive duration and inter-dive interval patterns. That verdict holds for routine foraging. Some dives, probably the longest ones logged in Hawaii and the Mariana region, cross the lactate threshold. Those dives incur a real metabolic cost and require extended surface recovery. That is the documented physiological constraint, real, measurable, and substantial. An average adult short-finned pilot whale in Hawaii, according to Goff and colleagues' 2024 energetic study in the Journal of Experimental Biology, needs 142 squid per day, roughly 52,000 per year, to maintain neutral energy balance. Each foraging dive costs approximately 73.8 kilojoules per minute against 44.4 kilojoules per minute at the surface. Hawaiian short-finned pilot whales spend about 82% of their daytime in shallow diving or surface resting, partly because deep foraging bouts demand substantial recovery. A word on coordination, because it appears in discussions of pilot whale hunting often enough to need addressing. Biologging data confirms that pilot whales synchronize the timing of foraging bouts. Groups begin and end extended deep dive sequences together, and body contact and synchronous diving have been recorded in pairs of long-finned pilot whales off Norway. Short-finned pilot whales produce tonal social calls during deep foraging dives at depths up to 800 meters, as documented by Jensen and colleagues in a 2011 Proceedings of the Royal Society B paper. Those calls appear to maintain group cohesion and identity under pressure. Whether any of this extends to coordinated attacks on individual prey items is a different question. The literature does not support it. A 2021 review titled "Deep Diving Beaked Whales Dive Together but Forage Apart" found no evidence of cooperative prey capture in deep diving toothed whales, including pilot whales. They dive as a social unit, they appear to hunt as individuals. Pilot whales aren't passive animals in other contexts. Long-finned pilot whales have been documented approaching killer whales at speed in the Strait of Gibraltar in what De Stefanis and colleagues described as mobbing-like anti-predator behavior or intimidation. A 2022 study by Selbman and colleagues in Icelandic waters found that in 68% of interactions between the two species, killer whales moved away from pilot whales. In 28%, they did so at high speed. A 2024 controlled playback experiment published in Scientific Reports found that when killer whales were exposed to long-finned pilot whale calls, they switched to fast-traveling behavior and moved away from the sound source. That's experimental confirmation of a response. Whether it reflects fear, competitive avoidance, or some combination, the animal's own behavior implies that pilot whale calls carry social information beyond species recognition. That character sketch, an animal willing to confront a predator several times its individual size, is consistent with a species that organizes much of its life around navigating physiological limits. But it doesn't change the mortality record. The question the title raises is whether the deep squid hunt constitutes a documented drowning hazard. Here, the evidence is specific. There is no published record attributing death, injury, or physiological failure in a free-ranging pilot whale to a natural foraging dive on squid. Mass stranding investigations don't support that conclusion either. The 55 long-finned pilot whales that stranded at Tolster on the Isle of Lewis, Scotland, in July 2023 were found to be in good nutritional condition. Stable isotope analysis indicated they had been feeding successfully along the continental shelf edge and slope before stranding. The investigators concluded social and reproductive factors, multiple pod units, a female in difficult labor, alloparental behavior, were the likely contributors. A 1998 Tasmanian stranding of 114 long-finned pilot whales contained abundant deep-water cephalopod remains in stomach contents, meaning the animals had been feeding successfully before coming ashore. The 81 short-finned pilot whales that stranded along the Manipad coast of India in January 2016 were investigated with biosonar dysfunction as the proposed cause, not foraging dive physiology. The North Carolina short-finned pilot whale mass stranding in 2008 didn't determine a definitive cause. Decompression sickness like gas embolic lesions have been documented primarily in beaked whales, particularly in the Canary Islands, following sonar-associated events, not in pilot whales following foraging dives. Pilot whales in UK strandings have shown some gas embolic findings, but published analyses attribute those to anthropogenic disturbance rather than normal diving behavior. The documented case of pilot whales drowning in connection with water has a different cause entirely. Pilot whales captured in trawl nets often drown as they can't reach the surface to breathe, as the stock assessment literature notes. Bycatch in fishing gear is a leading documented cause of long-finned pilot whale mortality in US waters. That is, mechanical prevention of surfacing. A net holds the animal down. It isn't oxygen depletion during a voluntary dive. So the verdict is a measured one. Pilot whales, specifically short-finned pilot whales, for whom the biologging record is richer, routinely descend 400 to 800 meters to reach mesopelagic squid during the day, with occasional dives to 1,018 meters and beyond. Their typical deep foraging dive of around 15 minutes falls within or just at the species-level behavioral aerobic dive limit of 18.8 minutes. The longest recorded dives in Hawaii and the Mariana region, at 27 to 29 minutes, almost certainly exceed that limit and invoke anaerobic metabolism in locomotor muscle, incurring a real lactate debt that requires extended surface recovery. The energetic cost of the hunt is substantial, 73.8 kilojoules per minute at depth versus 44.4 at the surface, with recovery breathing costs on top. That is a hard physiological ceiling, documented, measurable, and consequential for how the animal structures its day. What isn't documented is the outcome that the word drowning implies: an animal unable to reach air, losing consciousness from oxygen depletion, dying in the water column from a foraging dive. No such event appears in the published mortality record. There is no shallow water blackout analogue confirmed for free-ranging cetaceans during natural dives. The cardiovascular system protects the brain and heart even as peripheral muscle goes anaerobic. The whale surfaces voluntarily, breathes hard, and recovers. The title dramatizes a real constraint. The oxygen budget is tight. The stakes for getting it wrong are terminal. But drowning risk describes what is at stake if the physiology fails, not what the evidence shows actually happening. The squid live deep, the hunt is expensive, and the margin between a successful return and a catastrophic one is genuine. But the published record shows pilot whales managing that margin routinely and successfully across tagged populations from Tenerife to Hawaii. If you want to see the next investigation in this series, the comment with the most traction on this question was asking specifically about Humboldt squid, Dositicus gigas, and the predators that hunt them. Name the species or the predator you want examined next, and that's where the next investigation goes. Subscribe if you want to be there when it does.